The late Pope Paul VI, who was elected in the midst of the Second Vatican Council, transformed the papacy into a moral force for world peace. One of his defining moments was a speech he gave to the United Nations on October 4th, 1965, being commemorated this weekend on its 60th anniversary. Fr.John Tuohey, a retired priest in the diocese, recently released a 2-volume book set highlighting Pope Paul VI's peace initiatives. Steve Kiltonick sat down with Fr.John to talk about the pontiff who, despite all his accomplishments, is often referred to as the forgotten pope.
Fr.John Tuohey grew up in the turbulent 1960s, during the time of Vatican II, the Vietnam War, and civil rights protests. After the death of Pope John XXIII in 1963, Cardinal Archbishop of Milan, Giovanni Battista Montini, was elected as Pope Paul VI, while Vatican II was still in session.
In a lot of ways, it was felt like Paul VI was really making the church relevant. He spoke out against the Vietnam War, very much cared for the poor. He traveled the world with his messages of peace. So he very much captured my imagination, and it's fair to say that in many ways he influenced me to become a priest in the first place, got me excited about the church. So I've always had an attraction to Paul VI.
That attraction inspired Father Tuohey to write a 2-volume book set titled Pope Paul VI and His Quest for Peace, 1963 to 1978. Volume 1 focuses on what Father Tuohey calls the untold story of a pope committed to ending war, including his groundbreaking United Nations address and Vietnam War initiatives. It was recognized by the Catholic Media Association with a first prize and Individual Excellence Award for a first-time author of a biography. Volume 2 is a commentary on Pope Paul's New Year's peace messages, his theology, and his advocacy for justice and human rights as the pathway to peace. Father Tuohey conducted research and wrote in a number of places, including the quiet solitude of the Benedictine St. Mary's Monastery in Petersham, where he is an oblate. Father Tuohey discovered a rare document at the monastery library, thanks to Brother Isidore.
What they had that I couldn't find anywhere else, they actually have pastoral letters of the future Paul VI when he was Cardinal Archbishop of Milan. And so this is an example, man's religious sense. So this library here was just an incredible resource for me. I'm very grateful to Brother Isidore and all the monks and the Benedictine nuns here. But it was a great place to write because it was quiet, but also just to be surrounded with all this literature. It was just the right place to really reflect on Paul VI and to take account of his teachings and to do the writings.
Father Tuohey explains why Pope Paul became known as the Forgotten Pope.
He was preceded by John XXIII, who just captured the world's imagination, this short little fellow who just had such a personality. And then he's followed by John Paul II, who was young and vibrant and was Pope for 20-something years.
Father Tuohey felt Pope Paul VI wasn't credited enough for what he accomplished during his papacy, especially in his pursuit of peace. After Vatican II, the pontiff believed the church needed to move in a new direction to bring the church into the modern world. A man of dialogue, Pope Paul designated world peace as urgent in his first encyclical, Ecclesiam Suam, or Christ Church. But it wasn't until after his trip to India in 1964 when Pope Paul felt we needed to dramatically change our relationship with the Third World if peace could ever be achieved.
He really got the idea in the poverty of India that if there's going to be peace in the world, we have to lift up developing nations. And that led to Populorum Progressio, his encyclical, in which he says development is the new word for peace. So this was all churning in his mind, and the best stage to make that presentation was the UN.
Pope Paul VI was the first pope to travel to the Western Hemisphere and the first to address the United Nations General Assembly on October 4, 1965, marking the UN's 20th anniversary. Pope Paul began his 14-hour visit to America by riding President Johnson's presidential motorcade through the streets of New York to St. Patrick's Cathedral.
There were 50,000 people crowding the streets, and he did comment to Cardinal Spellman, who was his host, the Cardinal Archbishop of New York, that so many people, I'm surprised.
After greeting the crowds at St. Patrick's, Pope Paul met President Johnson at the Waldorf Astoria for an hour at LBJ's request.
They touched on trouble spots in the world, Vietnam. Johnson was well aware of Paul's opposition to the war, and especially to the bombing.
This would be the beginning of a cordial but contentious relationship. Pope Paul then made his way to the UN to address the 117 delegates and 100 foreign ministers and guests.
He started his speech very humbly. I'm just one of your brothers. I'm just here to talk to you. I have no interests beyond being part of your conversations. And what he did that was unprecedented was he lent his moral authority and the moral authority of the church to the United Nations. That this is the international organization that can lead us to world peace. And he reminds them, isn't that the reason you were created? To exactly do that?
Pope Paul touched on his opposition to nuclear weapons before getting to the summit of his 30-minute talk, saying,
"No more war, never again war. Peace, it is peace which must guide the destinies of peoples and of all mankind."
After he finished,
dead silence for about 30 seconds or so. And then the place just erupts in applause, in a standing ovation. No world leader had addressed the United Nations that had such an impact as he did on that day.
From the UN, it was on to the packed Yankee Stadium to celebrate Mass.
So there were 90,000 people in Yankee Stadium, the largest crowd ever, because they broke every fire rule in the world to cram people onto the infield. You could never do that today.
Pope Paul's last stop before returning to Rome was New York's World's Fair. Here he visited the Vatican Pavilion, where Michelangelo's Pieta was on display. Pope Paul actually lent the marble statue to the pavilion, where it became one of the most popular attractions at the fair. Father Tuohey said the Pope's direct engagement with LBJ stopped the American bombing in 1968 and helped jumpstart the Paris peace talks. Pope Paul was never credited for the critical role he played in orchestrating the talks, which eventually ended the Vietnam War. In Volume 2, If You Want Peace, Father Tuohey comments on the transformative peace messages Pope Paul delivered from 1968 until 1978, in the process moving away from the old adage, if you want peace, prepare for war.
He felt it was important that he bring greater definition and clarity. An exact idea is his words, to bring an exact idea to peace. And so throughout those peace messages, sometimes he's very explicit. If you want peace, work for justice. If you want peace, promote human rights. He wants peace to be in the forefront of people's minds. And what better way to do that than to have a day dedicated to thinking about peace? And on every New Year's Day, he would issue the World Day of Peace.
Pope Paul VI died peacefully on August 8, 1978, the Feast of the Transfiguration, a day that was important to him spiritually. Pope Paul VI was canonized a saint on October 14, 2018. As we reflect on the 60th anniversary of Pope Paul's historic UN speech, Father Tuohey believes it's important to remember the forgotten Pope.
He knew what peace was, and he was determined to proclaim it. And just for that message alone, to bring him back into our consciousness.
With the world and our nation in a state of violence, Pope Paul's message is more relevant than ever, that we all persevere in a quest to create a world in which there is never again war. For Real to Real, I'm Steve Kiltonick.
And the accolades continue for Father Tuohey, who also won a first prize in history from the Pacific Book Awards and a silver medal in theology from the 2025 Illumination Book Awards. Congratulations to Father Tuohey for all his well-deserved success with these books.